action.
All right, so now that you've created your session structure, we're going to go into the next segment here, which is the prompt hierarchy. Prompting is what we use to help assist the learner on how to increase the correct response. In this case, it's the skill or behavior that we want to increase. This could be them attending, focusing, using their words, or communication. This can also be skills like tacting, manding, so a lot of the verbal operants. So we use prompts to help the learner be successful and to provide or evoke the correct response. Prompts are always antecedents, which means they are given before the behavior occurs. So we're going to go back a little bit here because it's important when you're running each verbal operant that you are using what we call a discriminative stimulus. A discriminative stimulus is a form of a prompt. In other words, it's SD, discriminative stimulus. So an example of this would be manding. An SD is what you as the instructor will be saying to the learner. So a form of an SD for mand would be, what do you want? So you as the instructor will say, what do you want, to the learner. That prompt of what do you want will evoke the correct response from the learner to communicate, I want water or I want cookie. Same with tacting. So tacting's SD is a prompt such as, what is this? So let's say you point to the table. So the SD is a prompt for the learner to communicate and label or tact table. And so you continue to do this across all verbal operants. Another SD or prompt for, let's call a COEX. A COEX, the SD or verbal prompt would be ball. The learner has to say ball in return to be a correct response. For the verbal operant intraverbal, the SD or prompt would be the instruction itself. So, or excuse me, it would be the exchange itself. So you would say, let's say you want to teach the learner, fill in the blanks, row, row, row your boat. So your SD would be row, 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 and the client's correct response would be boat. Following that would be listener responding. So the SD for listener responding is the instruction itself. So the instruction is the prompt. Pick up ball is the SD that you as the therapist will provide. That will be the prompt to evoke the response from the learner to follow the instruction. And then finally, the SD or prompt of motor imitation is do this, which is motor imitating the action. The learner hopefully will evoke the response of imitating your action. Now that you know what a prompt is and what an SD is, we're going to go into a prompt hierarchy. It's important when you're providing a prompt that you are delivering it every single trial of the target. So every time you run a trial, you want to ensure that you're representing the SD or the prompt, followed by the prompt level. The first part is exactly why do we use prompts? So prompts are a valuable tool in ABA skill acquisition programs. They can help learners to, 1, learn new skills more effectively. Prompts can provide learners with the extra support they need to learn new skills. This can help them learn the skills more quickly and easily. Second, become more independent. So you want the learner to be more independent. So prompts can help the learner become independent by gradually fading in over time, the prompts. This teaches the learners how to complete a task on their own. And thirdly, this prompting also reduces frustration for the learner. It reduces frustration for both the learner as well as the teacher, yourself. So when learners are struggling to complete a task, prompts provide them the tools to support them in order to successfully evoke the correct response. So that's the importance of why we use prompts. For the prompt hierarchy, think of it as a pyramid. At the very top, you have what we call independent. And here at EFC, we use a first trial data collection or first trial prompt hierarchy. So the first step is independent. We want to assume that the learner may know this skill. So we will not prompt them the first trial. What instead we'll do is we'll present the SD. In this case, we'll say, do this. So we present the SD of do this, which is the motor imitation. Then we wait 3 seconds. We wait for the learner to respond. If the learner does not respond, you go ahead and represent the SD, which is the next intrusive prompt, which is gestural. And you would do this after you present the SD followed by the prompt. So an example of this would be, let's say this is the learner's hand and this is my hand. You might gesture and say, do this. If the learner is able to do that, then in the prompt hierarchy, you'll end your trial. You know that the learner is able to evoke the correct response of motor imitation of touching their nose using just the gestural prompt. So we're gonna go into the next intrusive prompt, which is verbal. So a verbal prompt is providing them an approximation of the response. In this case, we skip this because this doesn't apply to the motor imitation skill. A way to use this prompt is if we say to the client, we want to teach them how to say their name. Let's say the child's name is Johnny. We'll say, what is your name? Which is the SD for intraverbal. The learner would be prompted to say ja. And then once the learner hears ja, we hope that that will evoke the behavior of Johnny. So that is an example of verbal prompting. The fourth one would be visual or positional. And that looks like, providing a visual or positioning an item that will prompt the learner to respond correctly. The next one would be model. So you're working towards most intrusive prompting, least to most. So the next one will be modeling. So you're modeling the act of the appropriate behavior. So it could be do this and actually having the learner model clapping. Followed by the next intrusive, which is partial physical. So you might gently grab the learner's hands and put them together. And then last but not least would be full physical, which is hand over hand or hand under hand. So let's demonstrate it right now in the next segment.